Okay, you may be seated. Okay, let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, Assistant State Attorney. Both sides ready to proceed?
We have just one minor issue that I think the court can resolve before the jury comes in.
Yes, sir.
I made an inquiry with counsel to see, it appears that Mr. Ashton is going to attempt to inquire with Dr. Huntington as to whether he was a student of Dr. Haskell. We would object to that line of inquiry as it is improper bolstering of Dr. Haskell, somehow trying to insinuate that he's the master, the other one's the student, that sort of thing. Therefore, his opinion should be considered with greater weight than that of Dr. Huntington.
Mr. Ashton?
Well, I think the latter part of that maybe goes to a question of what can be argued, but who he studied under is part of his qualifications. So I don't know that it's a question I should not be permitted to ask. Obviously, I don't know that I would make an argument that, you know, he's the Karate Kid and my guy is Mr. Miyagi, but, you know, I do think it's a fact that can come out.
Well, it depends.
I just think.
And the reason I say it depends on whether or not the defense, in their questioning of this witness, attempts to discredit the qualifications or the opinions. Well, discredit the qualifications of Dr. Haskell. Then if it does, then the rule is that you can bolster. And more specifically, under Mr. Mason's book, Earhart. Well, they got 2 copies over there, don't you, Mr. Mason? So it really depends on what happens now.
I may, just to inform the court, these 2 experts may have, of course, different opinions as they are entitled to as experts, but I do not intend on challenging the qualifications of Neil Haskell in any way, shape, or form. He is a qualified forensic entomologist, board certified, and is one of the most respected members in his field, as is Dr. Huntington.
It really depends, and I would have to see at the conclusion of your direct examination of your witness whether or not that question would be fair game. So what I will do is at the conclusion, y'all can approach the bench and then I can say yes or no.
Yes, sir.
But it's kind of hard for me to say at this time.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Okay.
Anything else from either side?
Nothing from the defense.
Nothing from the state.
We would recall Dr. Timothy Huntington.
Also remember one thing though, Mr. Baez. You went into the thing about his qualifications, about the diplomat and what it took to be a diplomat.
Yes, sir.
And the express purpose of that was to talk about his abilities to testify or not testify. So there may be some relevancy as to whether or not he was a, quote, student.
It would not have been through the process of Well, I can tell you this much.
I don't know, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's move here because we can engage in a long intellectual discussion and debate about that issue. Okay, does the state recognize presence of jury?
Yes, sir.
And the defense?
Yes, sir, we do.
Members of the jury, I hope you had a good lunch. I don't think it will be as good as your dinner, though, tonight. All right, you may continue.
May it please the court. Mr. Ashton. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Dr. Huntington.
Good afternoon.
I think where we left off, sir, was we were discussing the items in the trunk of the Pontiac Sunfire, and you gave us your opinion as to the insect activity with regards to the garbage bag. Was there anything that you were made aware of that was found outside of the garbage bag that was of evidentiary value in this case?
Objection to the broadness of the question, evidentiary value. If he's talking about entomological evidence, there's no objection, but that was broad.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Yes, sir. Was there any entomological evidence of evidentiary value in the trunk of the car outside of the garbage bag?
There were a few samples recovered from outside the garbage bag, in addition to, I believe, the vacuum sweepings that did contain some insect evidence. I believe there were two items of evidence or samples of evidence that were outside of the garbage bag that contained insect material.
Okay, and did the number of insects tell you anything, or do you have an opinion as to what was found outside of the garbage bag?
There was a very low number of insect evidence, articles of insect evidence recovered outside of the bag. Same insects that were recovered from inside the bag, just very low numbers.
Okay. Now I have a question that may seem a bit strange, but do you think there is a difference between trash and garbage?
I don't know if there's a specific Webster's dictionary difference. I think it's more of a colloquial or regional dialect phrase.
As an entomologist, is there a difference between garbage and trash as you would see it?
I don't believe those words appear in the dictionary of entomology, no.
Okay. In the course of your work, is there a difference is what I guess I'm trying to say?
I think I use them interchangeably.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the trash. Are you aware of some paper towels that were found inside the trash?
Yes, I am.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, did that have any maggot activity, and how could you account for that? Or tell us about them.
The paper towels that were recovered from the garbage bag or trash bag did contain a number of humpback or scuttlefly puparia, those empty cocoons that I alluded to earlier. There were no live material associated with them, just those empty casings.
Okay. And what is your opinion as to what that means from an entomological standpoint?
Well, given the articles that were in the trash bag, it didn't surprise me at all. When a maggot looks for a spot to pupate, they look for hidden, secreted away, tight-fitting locations. So a crumpled up paper towel has a lot of those nooks and crannies that they look for, and it makes perfect sense for them to pupate there. In fact, when I rear insects in the lab, oftentimes I'll use pieces of paper toweling material for them to pupate in, and that's a very common practice.
Okay. So does the fact that there were maggots or things attached to a a paper towel give you any indication as to whether that paper towel was used for anything other than to clean up something that is not a dead body?
I
don't know.
could you rephrase
I don't know.
that?
I guess that's a poorly asked question. I'm sorry. Does the fact that you have these, I guess, this specific 4-day insects pupating in that area, does that tell you anything, or is there anything on them paper towels to give you any indication that they were used in any way, shape, or form to clean up decompositional material or anything else?
Objection beyond his area of expertise.
I asked them specifically as it relates to entomological evidence.
That's my objection. I'm sure an entomologist is qualified to give an opinion of that type.
Overall, he can answer it if he can.
When you find a pupation site, such as a paper towel, it associates itself with something other than a food source. So for example, if there was a food source on those paper towels, I would not expect to find those flies pupating there, because they leave the food source to find a place to hide, to pupate. So their presence on those paper towels is more indicative of an absence of food material associated with them rather than the inverse.
Okay. So the stage that you found them in was in the cocoon stage. Is that correct?
It was the enclosed or empty cocoon stage. So meaning indicating that the flies had already emerged as adults. And when they do that, they leave those puparia behind, and they last in the environment for very, very long periods of time.
Okay, so it's not during the feeding stage, it's during the I've been here stage already.
That is correct. The maggots have fed, they've pupated, they've completed their transition to adulthood, and then they've left. So if you, continuing with my butterfly analogy, the empty chrysalis hanging on a tree that's empty is analogous to that stage.
Okay. And was there anything that you identified from any of the materials that you covered that have any indication that, I'll strike that question. What else, what other information do you, well, let me talk a little bit about the garbage. Now, what attracts these insects to garbage?
These specific flies,
Objection, Your Honor, unless the question relates to the trash or garbage that was in this car, it's not relevant.
That's what I'm asking.
Sustain, rephrase the question. You just asked.
Yes. What in your professional opinion, do you believe attracted these insects to this trash?
based on the contents of this particular trash bag in this case, there was a number of cans of tobacco spit. I don't know what the technical term for that is, but that is a body fluid that decomposes itself. And these particular types of flies, these scuttle flies, these phorid flies, are very attracted to that sort of material. That is the primary item in the trash bag that I would attribute their presence to. Also, it appeared that there was a piece of, when I saw the photos, it was a dried up piece of meat of some sort inside of I think it was a bologna container that was in there that could have also accounted for it. But my assumption is that the tobacco spit was the primary attraction.
And would that be even if the tobacco spit was inside a closed container?
Yes, these flies, these scuttle flies, are very small. They are attracted to very what you could consider restricted food sources. In fact, I've recovered them from a sealed plastic bucket that we used to house anatomical specimens in the laboratory. They were breeding in there. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Your Honor, if I may publish defense exhibit C to the jury and to the doctor, I'd like to ask some questions.
What says the state?
Your Honor, I believe these are enlargements of photographs that are in evidence. If we could denote the items in evidence for the records, since that is not actually in evidence.
The two items of evidence that are depicted in this photograph are states 133 and states 128.
Okay.
Dr. Huntington, may I ask the witness to step down?
Yes.
Can you see that as well, Mr. Ashton?
No, could we just project the image on the screen so we could all look at it since they're in evidence?
I think we may be bouncing back and forth. It might be a little easier for the presentation this way.
Okay, I'm going to have to stand over here then so
That's
I can
okay.
see. So you may have to stand back.
Okay. Is the mic on? Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
I hear you.
Okay.
Come on, let's move on, folks.
Okay. Dr. Huntington, I'm going to, when I refer to an item, I'm going to refer to states 128, which will be the photograph on the left.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're facing it.
Okay.
And on the right, I will refer to states 133.
Okay.
Okay. So that's kind of-
2833.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Now, when you first inspected the garbage, which one of these items were you able to inspect visually with photographs?
Visually with photographs, I had access to both of them. I believe I probably spent more time looking at the 33 image.
And that would be the dry garbage?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is that how you would characterize it?
That's, yes.
Objection from a photograph. How he characterizes it from a photograph, jury can draw their own conclusion.
Overruled.
It appears to be dry garbage to me.
Okay. Now, what would be the difference as it relates to entomological evidence?
I'm sorry. I think this setup is just not going to work. I can't see the photo. And I don't fault Mr. Baez. I know he has to lean forward to point, but I can't see the photo. Could we,
I can allow Mr. Ashton to hold both of the photographs.
but I need to see what council's pointing at, and I can't
Pull it back a little bit, Mr.
see somebody's
Baez.
lap.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Is that better, sir?
Yeah, as long as you don't block.
Come on, folks, let's move on.
All right. Now, so what would be the difference, speaking with entomological type evidence, if you had them attract to this trash versus this trash?
You said with regards to the attractiveness
Yes.
of the trash? The flies in this case, and in fact, most, there we go. The flies that are going to be attracted to the garbage are going to be more attracted to the damp, wet garbage than they would be to dry garbage.
And why is that?
The reason for that is primarily to do with the larval habits or the maggots, the way they feed. When a fly lays eggs, the eggs dry up very quickly. So they have to be in an environment that is moist enough to prevent desiccation or drying, as well as the maggots themselves don't feed well on dry material. If you have a piece of fresh meat versus a piece of beef jerky, it's the same sort of thing. You don't expect to see maggots on beef jerky because it's too dry. They don't feed on it at all.
Okay. So how is it that we saw, or they were able to recover, I guess, maggot or insect activity off of this dry garbage?
Let me object for a moment. I'm not sure the testimony indicated they took it off the garbage in that condition.
That's something you can bring it out across. Let's move on.
The evidence that's visible in the dry garbage photos is the remains or non-feeding stages of those insects that presumably were feeding in the damp stage or wet stage.
Is it fair to say this is what they would have been attracted to initially, and then what's left of them and their remains is here?
That's correct.
Okay. And do they attract to anything? Do you need a hamburger for them to be attracted to that, or actual big pieces of meat for the flies that you found in this case to be attracted to these types of materials?
No, it doesn't have to be a substantial piece or amount of material to draw their attention to it.
Does the bacteria of any items play a role? Any of the food items play a role in their attraction?
The flies themselves are attracted to the smell of decomposition. And decomposition itself is the process of being eaten. When we die, we have gastrointestinal bacteria inside of us that begin to eat us from the inside out. That's why things smell. The food items have bacteria on them that are eating them as it's sitting there. So the bacteria itself is what begins that decomposition process and what emits those volatile chemical cues that the insects are honing in on. Different food sources, different organic food material or formerly living things certainly will have different types of bacteria which may emit different waste gases which would influence their attractiveness to specific insect groups.
Does a empty carton of like Stouffer's food or something along those lines, does that have bacteria on it that the flies are attracted to?
It certainly has bacteria on it. I think it depends on what it is, whether or not they're going to be attracted to it.
Okay. Is there any other evidence that was involved in the trash that you think the jury would find interesting?
Objection.
As it relates to your entomological findings?
With regards to the entomological findings, there were a number of these pupal cases on lots of different items of the trash. For example, there's a Velveeta box.
You want to use the pointer?
I would love to use the pointer. This Velveeta box right here, there were a number of these phorid puparia attached to it. Trying to pick out which is which. This is a dryer sheet. There were puparia attached to it. There were puparia attached to some sort of stain stick type laundry thing. There were a number attached to it. There were a number attached to I don't know which one it is, but there's a piece of paper that was in there. And so, again, that reinforces this notion that the maggots are not necessarily feeding on whatever it is they're attached to. They've actually crawled away from what they're feeding on and then pupated somewhere else.
Is there anything inconsistent with what you found in the trash and what you found in the entire trunk that would lead you to conclude this is anything, or this entomological evidence is anything but the result of a bag of trash in the trunk of a car for 2 to 3 weeks?
I would expect to find the same thing in a bag of trash, in the car trunk, in the back of somebody's house, virtually anywhere. It's a bag of trash with trash feeding insects in it. There's nothing remarkable about that.
Okay. All right. Can I have some?
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Huntington, now I would like to shift our focus to the site off Suburban Drive. Okay. From the evidence that you reviewed, do you have any opinions as to, or let me rephrase that, let me ask, what does the insect evidence tell us there?
You're speaking specifically to the recovery site?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
The insect material from the recovery site associated with the remains there are what you would typically expect to find associated with remains at that location, that time of year, in normal circumstances. What was missing from that scene were the early colonizing flies, those blowflies that I was discussing earlier. And their absence is unusual in a case where a body is recovered outdoors in that nature.
Okay. And why do you say that as to it being outdoors being a factor?
Well, a body that is readily accessible in this case, and in this case, everything from the entomological perspective shows that it was a readily accessible body. The absence of those early colonizing insects is unusual because they should have been there. They should be there. They get there very quickly. There's no good reason at the scene why they shouldn't be there.
And what does that tell you?
What that indicates is that the body was moved or transported from some other location to the site where it was discovered. Now, the absence of those flies doesn't really tell you where the body may have been, but it certainly shows a postmortem movement.
Are there other things, perhaps in the soil, that you could make a determination as to where a body decomposed?
Certainly, there are a number of tests that can be conducted.
Objection. We have another discovery issue. Approach.
Okay. You may continue.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Huntington, you were talking about some of the indicators of why, of what would lead you to conclude that the body was moved. And I believe you were talking about the soil. What happens when you see?
When a body decomposes, as I referenced earlier with the research from the trunk, the body fluids from the soil, those decompositional fluids, come out of the body. And when it's in an outdoor environment, those body fluids, the decompositional fluids, will leach into the soil. And it changes the biotic or animal community. It changes the types of bacteria that are there. It changes the nematode community, for example, which are little microorganisms that feed on bacteria and each other. And it even changes it'll kill off the grass community around, or the plant community around it. It's like putting too much fertilizer on your lawn. There's too much nitrogen, it kills it. And when you are examining sites of decomposition, there are relatively emergent fields in forensic science right now that will not only look at the soil biotic and abiotic communities, the chemical and animal communities within the soil structure itself to determine the site of decomposition.
Repeat your last statement, sir.
There are recent studies that look at the biotic or living communities and the abiotic or non-living community structures in the soil itself. And by looking at those and examining those, you can tell if this is a site that something has decomposed versus another. And I referenced it earlier where a lot of this research is conducted at the University of Nebraska by Dr. Dave Carter. I work very closely with him on this research.
Let me break it down this way. So there's a stain on at the area on the ground where someone would decompose.
Yes.
Okay. And would that also include even a body that was in a couple of plastic bags?
Given the scenario of a body in a couple of plastic bags, if there is no breach to the bags, meaning that they are entirely sealed so that no fluid can escape from them, then I would not expect to find those at that soil community or at that soil location. If there are holes in the bag or tears or rips or something of that nature, certainly those fluids would spill out.
So if you as an entomologist or someone investigating a death scene outdoors, is that stain something you look for to where you should begin your initial investigation?
It is certainly something I would look at to describe the scene, describe the location. So for example, if a body is found outdoors and the site of discovery is abnormal in some way. So for example, if there is none of that staining or none of that plant material that's been killed off or something out of the ordinary.
These are outside the expertise of an entomologist. He's now talking about botany and soil chemistry. Object.
Overrule at this point.
Because you spend so much time looking at decomposing bodies, you just come to expect these things. It's a part of the natural taphonomy or decomposition process. And so anything that is unusual is certainly something that's going to stand out.
Okay. And are there any other items of evidence or entomological findings that you have that would support this conclusion, in addition to what you've already testified, or is that pretty much?
Could you be more specific or?
Did you find in the canvas bag or in the bags, were there early colonizers within the bag?
There were a few samples, I think there were 3 of puparial cases of those early colonizing blowflies.
Okay. So as it relates to the early colonizers, were they found anywhere near where area A of the remains were found?
The only early colonizing insects that were associated with the site of recovery were from the bag itself.
Okay. And what does that tell you?
Excuse me. It reinforces that idea that, or the hypothesis that those remains were moved, because if you have a body that's moved after it's begun that decompositional process, especially if it's in some sort of bag or container of some sort, you would expect some of those insects that have made that transition to the pupal stage even to be physically moved with the body. In this case, not finding them away from the body reinforces that, because if the body had decomposed at that site, they would have been found all over the place around where the body was recovered and in much greater numbers.
Okay. If I can have just a moment, I want to see if I have further questions.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you mean to suggest to this jury that this body fully skeletonized at another location and was then moved?
No, sir, I did not say that.
When you say decomposition, you're referring to the very early stages of decomposition, correct?
When I say decomposition,
Let me rephrase. When you say the body decomposed, was the word you used, elsewhere, you mean the very early stages of decomposition occurred elsewhere, correct?
when I say decomposed elsewhere or began decomposition elsewhere, I am primarily referring to the early stages of decomposition.
Which would be defined as what, for the benefit of the jury?
When you look at the stages of decomposition, there are a number of ways to describe it. Most scientists that work in the field of taphonomy or decomposition science use anywhere between 3 and I think 24 stages. I described it as 5 stages based on studies conducted earlier this century. The fresh stage, the bloat stage, the early decay stage, the early decay or active decay, then the advanced decay stage, and then the remain stage. The early stages, as I define them, especially with regards to this case, I would refer to those as the fresh stage and the bloat stage, and possibly even the beginning of active decay.
And how many accumulated degree days does it take to go through fresh and bloat stages on a child?
On a child,
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure that research has been done specifically to look at a child's body.
Well, can you just give us an opinion as to how many accumulated degree days it would take to go through fresh and bloat stages on a child of approximately 2.5 to 3 years? Small child.
I don't think I have those specific data available.
Well, could it be as short as a couple of days? Well, let me start over. Accumulated degree days basically are a mathematical formulation taking the average temperature times the number of days, correct?
Close.
Get us right on point.
Okay.
Ask that the witness be allowed to complete his answer.
Did you finish your answer, sir?
Close enough.
Okay, you may continue.
Go ahead. Just go ahead and fill it in for us.
Oh, okay. An accumulated degree day is the average daily temperature minus the minimum base threshold temperature. And it's an important distinction because there are some scientists who erroneously think you don't need to do that. And that's why I make the distinction.
Okay, average minus minimum. What's the average is pretty obvious. What does minimum base mean?
The minimum base threshold temperature is actually a mathematical construction. There is a temperature at which biological processes stop. And depending on what those processes are, determines what that temperature actually is. In the case of accumulated degree days or degree day science, it is a mathematical construct, meaning that it has no real biological meaning other than for the math to work, to use the model to do the calculations, you have to use the correct base temperature.
2 days at 90 degrees. How many accumulated degree days is that? 2 days, average temperature 90 degrees.
That would depend on what the base threshold temperature is.
And does that vary from region to region?
No, it depends on what biological process you're looking at, or for example, for what insect species you're looking at.
Well, I'm just talking about in terms of decomposition, because decomposition is also temperature dependent, correct?
Correct.
And those terms are also used in decomposition terms, correct?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. So in those terms, what would 2 days at 90 degrees equal in accumulated degree days?
If you assume a base temperature of 0 to make the math easy, 2 days at 90 degrees Fahrenheit would be 180 accumulated degree days Fahrenheit.
And why would 0 not be an appropriate number to use? I'm trying to understand this process.
Certainly.
In terms of decomposition, not animal, not insect growth, but just in terms of decomposition.
In terms of decomposition, well, in terms of anything, because again, it's kind of an arbitrary. A minimum threshold of 0 essentially makes the math easy in this case, but it's because I'm not basing it on a specific model. So for example, I could say arbitrarily that the minimum threshold temperature is 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which again has no biological significance. It's a mathematical construct.
Perhaps I can make this easier for you.
Okay, thank you.
What is the equivalency between 90-degree days and 60-degree days? How many 2 90-degree days equal how many 60-degree days, if that helps us understand it better?
You said 60?
60-degree days.
Okay.
Average day, average temperature, yeah.
Okay,
Maybe we'll understand it that way.
sure. 1 90-degree day average temperature would accumulate 1.5 60-degree day average temperatures.
Okay.
If that,
So basically, 2 days at 90-degree average temperature would equal 3 days at 60-degree average temperature.
that's correct.
Okay. I think maybe we've got our heads wrapped around that now. In your experiment, well, actually, let's go back to the scene. So what I'm trying to get, let us wrap our heads around here is, how long do you believe this body was at another location before it was moved to the Suburban Drive location? Are you talking a couple of days? What do you, flesh that out for us?
Okay. It's a hard thing to say, and the reason is because it depends on the environmental conditions at that site. So for example, if, let's say, the body was in a refrigerator, it could be months.
Well, let me stop you there. Let's assume temperatures like right now outside. You've experienced that obviously today.
It is it's very hot outside, yes.
Okay. So let's say that today is day 1.
Okay.
So how many days is it that you feel at this temperature we're experiencing right now that that body was someplace else before it went to that location? And it's around 95 degrees today, as I understand. I feel the same way.
Probably around 2 to 3 or maybe 4 days.
Okay. So with those assumptions in mind, you would agree that the body was placed at its finally found location within 2 or 3 days of death, roughly.
If you assume those environmental conditions.
All right, assuming those environmental conditions. So you would agree that from that point on, this body, the evidence is consistent with this body remaining at that location from that point forward. Correct?
If you assume that the remains were exposed to those conditions, and if you assume that they did not have some sort of intermediary conditions and were placed directly at that scene, that would be consistent.
And the scene, as you know it, is consistent with that scenario, that the body was placed there within 2 or 3 days of death and remained there consistently until it was found. There's nothing about the scene that would refute that. Isn't that correct?
I'm hesitating because it's consistent with a lot of scenarios, but yes.
It's consistent with the one I gave you.
Sure.
Okay. So that means that this body was for some 2 or 3 days in another location. Correct.
If you assume the environmental conditions that you proposed.
But, oh, right, assuming that is as far as temperature goes.
Yes.
Okay. And that location would have to be such that early colonizers were unable to get to it. Would that be correct?
No. And the reason for that is the early colonizers, there were early colonizers present on the body in very low numbers. So they had some access
At some point.
at some point.
But clearly, at some point, they were not able to get to the body, which is why they're not there. I believe that's what you said. Correct?
States what the witnesses testified to.
Overruled, he asked him, was that what he said? He can say yes or no.
What I said was that the insects had access to the body in early stages of decomposition because they were there, and then the body was moved some point thereafter.
Is it also not consistent with the body being inaccessible, but for the very late stages that those early colonizers would be interested in?
Could you rephrase that?
Yeah, that was a little sloppy. You're not talking about a precise window of opportunity. In other words, it doesn't go for 2 days and then all of a sudden, boom, this insect is no longer interested and now this one is. It's not that clear, correct?
It can be that clear depending on the circumstances.
Is it usually that clear?
It depends on the circumstances. Because we're talking about early colonizing flies in this case, or here at this moment, there is a definite window where they lose any attraction to the remains as a food resource, because they're looking at it as a resource for their offspring. Just like any other parent, they want their kids to do well. So they're not going to be attracted to, they're not going to colonize remains that are not going to be favorable to their offspring. At some point, depending on environmental conditions, those flies switch that off, where this set of remains is no longer attractive. And it can be very distinct, meaning that because these flies are not attracted to bodies at nighttime, for example, on whatever day they're laying eggs during the daytime, the next day they won't. So it can be a very distinct time. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does. So is what you're telling us is that this body had a full complement of early colonizers on it and somebody washed it off? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I did not say that.
Okay, well then why aren't the early colonizers there if the body was available to them? Why aren't they there?
The flies are not at the scene in this case, or rather the puparia
Right.
are not at the scene in this case because, in my opinion, of postmortem movement.
But the insects go with the body because that's their food source, isn't it?
If those insects were still associated with the remains during that movement, it depends on, for example, where the body was, what it may have been contained in, things of that nature.
So you're suggesting that the body is moved in that very short window between the time the eggs are laid and the time the larvae no longer are interested in the body, that it was moved in that window? I'm trying to understand what you're telling us.
There are a couple of different scenarios that would work in this example. The first is that the body was moved late in the feeding stages of these maggots, meaning that those early colonizing maggots had left the body in large numbers with only a few remaining, which would account for those few that are recovered in the bags themselves. That is one scenario, and that would take much longer, for example. Another scenario would be that large numbers of maggots that were removed from the body, as you suggested, and the body was then transported. Another scenario would be the large number of maggots, the body is placed into the containers or the bags as it was found and then moved. There are a number of...
Isn't there a fourth scenario, though? Isn't there a fourth scenario that the body in the early stages of decomposition was inaccessible to the flies? Isn't that a scenario that you forgot?
The body had to be accessible to the flies because there were flies present
At some point.
on the body when it was recovered. The early colonizers were recovered in association with the body, indicating that they did have access.
You showed us this chart. This one, Defense Exhibit AW. How long was that?
You have it upside down.
Sorry. How long did that take?
The photograph was taken in...
How long did it take for all of these bugs to appear?
I don't know what you mean by
They
appear.
didn't all appear at once, did they?
Oh, the flies gaining access?
Right, they don't all gain access at once.
It's not simultaneously. It's not there, or not there 1 second, there the next second.
I guess what I'm getting at is are you saying that it's not possible that the body was kept for a certain period of time in an area that was inaccessible to early colonizers, was moved within a very close in time to when they were no longer interested, so only a few of them got involved in it, like Dr. That's not possible?
Anything is possible.
Let's talk about the one I asked you. That is possible, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall giving a deposition in this case?
I recall giving 2 depositions. Yes, sir.
Now, do you recall Dr. Haskell's statement in his report about this issue?
I would have to look at Dr. Haskell's report to refresh my memory.
You have a copy of it with you?
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead and look at it.
Now you're referring to report 1 or
The
report...
report from the scene,
From the
specifically
scene.
the one where he discusses his interpretation of the lack of the relatively low number of early colonizers.
Do you have a page reference on that, or?
Just that portion.
Reference.
I don't. He needs to look at the portion that references that matter.
Have you found it, doctor?
I'm looking, sir.
Okay.
I apologize for the time.
Mr. Ashton, why don't you step up and show him where it is?
I'll try and find it. You see that portion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you recall me asking for counsel benefit page 61, line 7, generally if you agreed with Dr. Haskell's,
Position.
this is the deposition, I'm sorry, Your Honor, the deposition of January 28th, 2011,
What page?
page 61. Now, actually, please read what Dr. Haskell said in that portion of his report.
Certainly. The observation of reduced numbers of initial colonizers is consistent with the suggestion that the body was initially stored in a location that excluded initial colonizers.
Now, in your deposition, I asked you, and I'll read the question and then your answer at line 7. I said, okay, now the
I don't think there's anything inconsistent with these statements.
He said, I don't know if you want a speaking response, Judge.
No, just a second. Overruled.
Now, I ask you the following question. Okay, now, is there anything, we've talked about one aspect of Dr. Haskell's report. Is there anything in Dr. Haskell's report of the scene with which you disagree or take issue? In other words, I don't want to go through it line by line. If you tell me that you're in agreement with it, then we'll just stop there. If you're not, then we'll go to what you disagree with. And your answer, well, the only part, really, there's not a lot to disagree with. The report is very straightforward. I've examined most of the specimens, so in the off chance that there's something that jumps out at me, jumps out at me that would disagree with his conclusions, that would be when I would find it. Otherwise, no, his report is very similar or the same as what my report would look like given the same evidence. Are you now indicating that you do not agree with that conclusion in Dr. Haskell's report, that the insect evidence is consistent with the body being held in a circumstance where early colonizers were excluded?
That is one possibility. I believe I was just expanding on more possibilities, yes.
Well, you just said a moment ago that you didn't think that was possible. So do you agree with his conclusion that the evidence is consistent with that scenario, most consistent with that scenario, or do you not?
It depends on the circumstances or the, in this case, environmental conditions that the body would have been maintained in.
Well, is there something about the environmental conditions that you know now that you didn't know when you answered my question in January of this year?
Characterization, Judge. That is not what this witness has testified to.
Overruled.
There's some facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Is anything different?
As far as my
As far as your knowledge of the environmental conditions?
No.
And you would also agree with his conclusion that the evidence is consistent with the body being deposited there in June or July of 2008, correct?
That is consistent with those dates, yes.
Now, let's talk for a moment about if in fact this body were kept in the early stages of decomposition in some area that was isolated from the early colonizers, it's true, is it not, that that place would smell, that it would stink?
Yes, I think, well, yes, if it were allowed to decompose in the absence of those early colonizers, then yes, I think that is a fair assumption.
So wherever this body was when it was excluded from early colonizers, what was in the trunk or someplace else, that place would stink, and you would not be able to get the stink out. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Because the smell of human decomposition, you would agree, is very recognizable. Wouldn't you agree?
I think the smell of any kind of decomposition is very recognizable, yes.
And as you yourself said, you can't clean it out, you can't get it out. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So wherever this body decomposed, it would smell distinctive, wouldn't it?
It would smell bad, yes.
And that smell would be difficult to ever get out, wouldn't it?
It is difficult, yes.
When you examined the Pontiac Sunfire in this case, did you examine it in, I think, July of 2010?
Yes, July of 2010.
So 2 years after the events that we've been discussing, correct?
Yes.
All of the trunk liner had been removed, correct?
Yeah, yes.
There was no garbage in the car, correct?
Not in the trunk.
And according to the evidence as you know it, that garbage had been removed more than 2 years before that. Isn't that correct?
And request a sidebar.
Okay. You may continue.
When you viewed the trunk, July of 2010, it still smelled, didn't it?
There was a smell in the trunk, yes.
Now, it was fairly weak at that point, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So you couldn't actually identify it as human decomposition as opposed to anything else, correct?
Knowing that there was a bag of garbage found in the trunk, I could have easily associated it with garbage or ascribed it to a garbage smell.
When in your experience has a bag of garbage stunk up a car 2 years after it was removed? And what was in that garbage? Dr. Huntington.
I can honestly say I've never left a bag of garbage in a car trunk in Florida during the summer for a week. So
Have you
I don't
left
have
one-
that experience.
Have you left one in Nebraska?
Nah, I don't put garbage in my trunk whenever
Have you ever
possible.
walked past the dumpster
Yes.
in Nebraska?
Yes.
In other states?
Yes.
Now, sir, let's talk about your experiment. You don't need to step down. I'm just going to put it way over here. So,
Okay. Thank you.
this is one of 6.
You stand on the floor.
As he's walking, I've got a couple of preliminary questions. When were you hired? You were hired in this case initially on December the 11th of 2008. Is that correct?
Yes.
When did you begin this experiment?
September 2010.
This experiment was created specifically for this case. Isn't that correct?
No, sir, it was not.
It was not.
No, sir.
Why was it created?
I have a long-standing research history in examining barrier effects to fly colonization. It is common, or rather, many bodies have been recovered from vehicle trunks. There are case studies and research in the literature that deal with how long of a delay there may be in those conditions in vehicle trunks. And I had occasion to meet the owner of a towing company that has a number of junk cars. And talking to him, I said, hey, is this an experiment I can do with some of your vehicles? And he volunteered them.
Did you discuss with Defense Counsel doing this experiment before you began it?
I told them that I was going to do an experiment, yes.
And did your choice of doing this experiment have anything to do with your work in this case your work in this case?
This experiment specifically has been in the back of my mind for a long time. In this particular occasion, I did do some, I want to say, side experimenting with this specific case, but no, it was not specifically modeled after this case.
Prior to being involved in this case, on how many occasions in your practice have you been dealt with bodies in trunks for 2 or 3 days through that fresh and bloat stage only? On how many occasions?
I have never had occasion to work on a case with a body in a trunk.
Never.
No, sir.
So all of your opinions you've given us here today about what you would expect to see from a body decomposing in a trunk come from this one experiment. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct.
Okay. Where else does it come from?
There are a number of sources in the literature, specifically case studies, that deal with bodies recovered from vehicle trunks.
How many of those involved small children?
I'm not aware of any that specified a small child.
How many of those involved small children wrapped in blankets?
None that I'm aware of.
How many of those involved small children wrapped in blankets and stuffed in a garbage bag?
Objection, Judge. This question's been asked and answered twice.
Call the roll.
Again, none.
How many involved a child wrapped in a blanket, stuffed in a garbage bag, stuffed in another garbage bag?
Objection. Objection, Judge. This question's been asked and answered 3 times.
Overruled.
So we can assume that none of your studies involved a child wrapped in a blanket, stuffed in 2 garbage bags, and stuffed in a laundry bag. None of the studies involved any of those, did they?
I think that is a fair assumption, yes.
Why didn't you wrap your pigs in a blanket? I promised I'd say that, Judge. But seriously, why didn't you wrap your pigs in a blanket?
Thank you for saying that.
That's okay. We needed it right now. Told you I'd do it. Go ahead.
I didn't wrap the pigs because that's not what I was looking at in this specific experiment. I was specifically focusing on the restriction of the trunk itself. There are other studies that have looked at pigs in a blanket, but that's not what I was looking at.
Or pigs in a blanket in a bag?
I don't know that that combination has been attempted.
But you would agree that this is not a fair representation of what Caylee's body, or what the trunk would have looked like with Caylee's body in it, because she was wrapped in a blanket, 2 bags, and a laundry bag. So you agree this is not an accurate description, right?
If you are looking at the final product of decomposition, then that would be correct. What I was examining in this case, in this experiment, which does have specific relevance to this case, is the not only attractiveness of a body in a trunk to blowflies, early colonizing flies, but also their ability to access the remains, or rather to access the vehicle's trunk.
But you only included one of many barriers between the flies and Caylee's body. You didn't include any of the rest in this study, correct?
I included the most external barrier, meaning that if the body, in this case, had I wrapped the pig in a blanket, I'm sorry, I can't get over saying that.
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
If I'd wrapped the pig in a blanket, placed it in multiple trash bags, placed it in a laundry bag, the flies could still have penetrated that vehicle trunk. And in that case, you would still see the same sort of piles of dead insect evidence inside the vehicle. And not only that, if the flies can smell the body, in this case, wrapped in multiple wrappings, they can almost certainly penetrate those external wrappings and get to the body.
But you just told us that, oh, maybe I misunderstood. Were any of the studies that you've, let me rephrase. You've never had an experience with a body in the trunk in any circumstance, correct?
Other than this research?
Other than this? Okay.
That's correct.
So were any of the studies that you did look at involve bodies wrapped in plastic bags in trunks?
Yes.
How many?
One. It was a case study of a homicide. I don't think they wanted to replicate it.
I'm sorry, what was that relevant to what I just said? We'll move on. So one case study.
Yes,
One
sir.
case study. And tell us the circumstances of that.
That was a body recovered in Europe where the head of the victim was placed in a garbage bag. I don't recall offhand if it was multiple garbage bags. It very well could have been. Wrapped in garbage bags, placed in the trunk of a vehicle, although in the citation it refers to it as the boot of the vehicle because they're European.
Right. And based upon that one study, you've just told this jury that there's no way that the bag could be a barrier to flies, no matter how it was set. Based on that one study. Is that your testimony?
That is not what I meant to imply.
All right.
I apologize if it was taken that way. There are many studies that do look at the barrier efficiency of trash bags.
We can take this down now. So, but only one of them deals with the trash bag in the trunk. Is that what?
The one case study,
Okay.
yes.
Why couldn't a trash bag which is sealed and wrapped keep bugs out? Isn't that why we buy them from the store, to keep the bugs out of our trash?
I think that's one reason why people
Well, no,
use them.
tell us. I'm serious. Why is it that a trash bag which is sealed cannot exclude these early colonizers. That seems what you're saying.
Okay. If the smells can get out of a bag, that indicates that it is not airtight. And so when a fly, in this case, can smell the odors of decomposition, those attractive chemicals that bring them to the body in the first place, a female fly will actually deposit eggs on the boundary, on the outside layer. Say, for example, if you knot the bag or you use the drawstrings. The drawstrings are very not airtight, but if you knot the bag itself, if the odors are emitting from the bag, assuming no other holes in it, the flies, if they cannot penetrate the bag, they will actually oviposit or lay eggs there at the initial opening of the bag. When those maggots hatch, they will crawl in, and they are very, very good at fitting through small spaces.
Now, did you ever experiment with the effects of chloroform on attracting flies?
No, sir.
Did you?
Overruled.
Did you, in your experiment, put chloroform in any of the trunks with the pigs to see how that affected the early colonizers?
Judge, beyond the scope.
Overruled.
No, sir, I did not.
You are aware that chemical testing of the carpet and the trunk air indicated levels of chloroform, correct?
Yes.
And chloroform is actually a substance that can be used to kill insects, isn't it?
In high concentrations, yes, it can.
So what effect did the presence of chloroform have on the early colonizers?
You're making the assumption that there is a body associated in this case. Is that what I'm getting from
Take
you?
the following hypothetical.
Okay, please.
The body's in the trunk for a day or two, perhaps even placed there alive.
Object.
Just a second.
This witness is being asked to render an opinion outside of the parameters given by the court.
Overruled.
The body is, let's even say the individual is placed in the trunk alive and dies in the trunk. There's large amounts of chloroform on the body or in the air. What effect would that have on early colonizers colonizing this dead body? Do you know?
Because there's been no research on that specific topic, I don't know that there's a good answer for that. I will say that the dose of chloroform has to be sufficiently high to displace the oxygen levels to kill the insects themselves. If chloroform acts as most other chemicals do, that have been studied in this sort of scenario, for example. The research has been done where commercial pesticides, for example, have been used to try to displace those early colonizers. The effect is very short-lasting.
But if you change the biochemistry of the air, the odor, you change the attraction of the early colonizers. Isn't that correct?
Objection. This witness is being asked to testify about an area outside of his expertise.
Overruled. If you can answer the question, sir.
I think I can answer that question.
Sure.
Flies can detect, blowflies specifically, can detect parts per billion of the volatile chemicals that they're attracted to. For example, a female fly can smell a food source several miles away. So were there anything other than a complete displacement of those chemical cues, they would still be attracted.
So changing the chemistry of the odor, your testimony is, doesn't change the attractiveness of the flies?
Based on what I just said, it shouldn't.
But you acknowledge that there's never been any study.
to base that on.
Not to my knowledge.
So for all you know, the chloroform in the odor, in parts per million, mind you, might well have deterred the early colonizers.
I would find that highly unlikely.
But why, if it's never been studied?
Because I think what you're asking for, or what you're hypothesizing, is a total displacement of chloroform to decompositional gases, the sulfurous compounds that are emitted by the bacteria. What you're proposing is a 100%
No, sir.
replacement.
That's not what I'm proposing.
Prosecutor interrupting the witness in the middle of his
Sustain,
answer.
let the witness.
Go ahead and finish, then I'll clarify it for you.
Okay. What it seems to me that you're suggesting is a 100% displacement of chemicals in the air, chemical molecules in the air, and I find that extremely unlikely.
No, what I'm suggesting to you, sir, is simply that the chemical content of the odor has changed. And you don't have any idea what effect that change in the chemical content of the odor would have on the early colonizers. You just don't know, do you?
I think I just answered that, but could you rephrase that question for me, please?
I'm not sure. I don't think I can. If I can have the court reporter read it back if you like, but I don't think I can say it any
Ma'am,
different than I
could you
did.
please?
Question. No, what I'm suggesting to you, sir, is simply the chemical content in the odor has changed. And you don't have any idea what effect that change in the chemical contents of the odor would have on the early colonizers. You just don't know, do you?
Okay. I think what you're getting at, or what the way I'm hearing the question, is a misconstruction of how those flies are attracted. The flies don't smell the odor the same way you and I do. The flies pick up on individual molecules of those sulfurous compounds that are emitted. And because of that, changing the content of the air, okay, the chemicals that are floating around in the volatile gases in the airspace, you would have to replace every single one of those volatile sulfurous compounds that the flies are attracted to, one for one, essentially, to prevent their attractiveness. Does that get to what you're asking?
I think it does, but you will acknowledge that there are no studies on this.
I will acknowledge there are no studies on this specific interaction, yes.
Well, is there on others? Chloroform with other insects?
With chloroform specifically, I don't know.
The paper towels that were found in the garbage.
Yes.
What was on those paper towels, Dr. Huntington? Do you know?
I don't.
You've never read a report about what was on those paper towels?
I do have a report that, if you'd like, I can refer to.
What was just tell us what was on the paper towels.
The report states, and if you don't mind, I'd like to refer to it specifically so I don't mess up the wording.
Go right ahead.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to look for a photo while you're doing that.
Yes, sir.
What does it say?
I'm quoting from this. Fatty acids, such as the ones detected, palmitric, I'm going to mess these up, excuse me.
Witness identify what report he's referring to and who's the author of that report.
This is Dr. Voss's report, correct, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay, go ahead.
This is on page 7. Looks like the 4th paragraph. And I apologize to Dr. Vass for my mispronunciations here.
Sure.
Fatty acids such as the ones detected, palmitic, stearic, myristic, and olytic, indicates a fat decomposition product like adipocere or grave wax present on the paper towels.
Did you ever examine these paper towels yourself?
I did not.
Do you have any reason to dispute that that is in fact correct?
No, I assume that's correct.
And tell the jury what that is that he just described.
Adipocere is a fat substance. It's essentially hydrogenated body fat that is a product of some decomposition where the body fat is subjected generally to cool temperatures and low oxygen content.
Would the flies be attracted to that? The flies we've been talking about, the Megacillia scalaris.
That's pretty good.
I tried.
Yes, they would be.
But in this case, you think that they were attracted to a little bit of tobacco, pardon the expression, spit in a bottle that was sealed, as opposed to the adipocere in the napkins. Is that your opinion?
I don't know that I would characterize several cans of tobacco spit as a little bit.
If we could have State's Exhibit 133 shown to the witness.
Answering the question.
No, sir, I didn't.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Ashton,
I apologize.
please let the witness finish answering the question. Finish, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, I don't know that I would characterize that as a little bit. The presence of the flies on the paper towels themselves is not something you would expect to find if the paper towels themselves is contaminated with, in this case, adipocere, because they would not tend to pupate on or that near their food source.
Could we have State's Exhibit 133, please? May I publish to the jury and the witness?
You may.
This is the photograph that Mr. Baez showed you in a blown-up version. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
All right. Mr. Perez, if you could zoom in right there, please. Now, this is the container that you referred to in your discussions with Mr. Baez that contains the tobacco spit, for lack of a better word, correct?
Which container are you specifically?
This one right here that you pointed out has a small amount of brown substance in the bottom of it, right there.
Okay. That is one of several that contained the remnants of tobacco spit.
Let's go back to the larger photograph, please. Point them out to me, the rest of them.
Is this a touch screen? Or?
It is, yes.
Oh,
and if you'd like us to zoom in on a particular area, we can do that.
Okay. No, gosh, this is a little weird. Apparently, I'm not doing this very well.
You want us to zoom in on that area?
So on the cans.
Could we
Yes.
zoom in on the cans? Let me get your annotation out of the way.
Yeah, you can get that.
Go ahead.
Okay. When you look at the close-up photos of the tops of those cans, several of them, somewhere 3, 4, maybe 5 of them, at least, were used as spittoons.
How can you know that from a photograph?
You can see the remnants of, let me back up. Everyone that I've ever met that has chewed tobacco and spit into a can that leaves them laying around, it looks exactly like those, in that there are bits of dried tobacco on the lid, and as well as the staining.
Do you have those photographs with you that you could show us that you're basing this on?
I have them on a computer, yes.
Well, actually, we have the actual items here, so maybe we'll just go through them. What exhibit is that?
I'm going to object and request that he use the photographs because there's no guarantee that these items are still in the same condition as they were when the photograph was taken.
Objection overruled.
I'm going to show you the item from State's Exhibit 136. That is bag mark 2. Open it up and see if this is what you're talking about. See if I can.
Looks like a can to me.
Is that what you're talking about?
That does not look like one of them that I'm talking about.
Open the one that's number 10 to the record.
That's what I'm talking about.
So this brownish substance on top of the top.
Yes, sir.
May I approach before and can, I want to object. He's even asked if he can vote.
Excuse me, I can't hear counsel.
Mr. Baez, turn your microphone on. Mr.
Yes.
Ashton, do not publish things until you ask permission.
I'm sorry, Judge, I didn't have time.
I know.
May I first see the item?
Yes, you may.
So this is what you say attracted the bugs.
That can, in the condition that it would have been in originally, if someone had thrown away a can of chew or chew spit, would have easily attracted scuttleflies.
But there's nothing in this can. You want to look? Is there anything in that can? Is there any residue of anything in that can?
I think I would need a flashlight, or you'd need to cut the can open for me to make that statement. But
Well, is there any thing in the records saying there was anything in this can? Don't the records all say all cans were empty?
I'm not sure that I have those specific records. One could certainly assume that a bag of garbage with cans of tobacco chew in the back of a vehicle for over a week in Florida summer, that would evaporate over time and result in an empty can, though.
But there's still going to be something there. No. I withdraw the question, vaguely. You will agree that the records reflecting the people that collected them said they were all empty. The only thing that had anything in it was the one little bottle top.
For hearsay.
He's an expert. He's been testifying about what's in the cans based on photographs and records.
Overruled.
Could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Sure. Do you recall seeing this as an inventory of what's in the garbage bag?
Oh, yes, I do.
And they indicate that all the cans are empty, don't they?
Yes, they do.
And there's no entomological remnants in any of those cans. Isn't that correct?
In the cans, none were recovered. That is correct.
Or on the cans?
There are some photographs that show entomological remnants on the cans.
Which ones?
Again, I would need to look at the either photographs, or I would have to refer to them.
Now, you would agree that there's no,
Ask that the witness, since he's being asked about these this topic, that he be allowed to examine the photos to show and fully give his answer.
I believe that can be done in redirect, Your Honor.
The question has been asked, and when the witness has expressed a desire to be able to show these photographs to further explain.
Objection overruled. You can do that on redirect.
Now, with all that being said, you would agree with me, would you not, that tobacco spit doesn't smell like human decomposition ever, wouldn't you?
I don't know that I could put that qualifier of ever on there, because as a body fluid that is exposed to the decomposition processes of bacteria, there would certainly be a smell associated with it during its decomposition cycle. But I don't know that I...
You're saying that saliva, decomposing saliva, can smell just like a full decomposing body? Is that what you're saying?
That is not what I said, sir.
Okay. So the question is, you do agree, do you not, that that substance is not going to smell like a dead person?
I would not assume it to smell like a dead person.
And in this bag, you would agree, would you not, in this garbage bag, there was no food. Wouldn't you agree?
As I define food as things you can eat, I would agree with that statement, yes. There is nothing in there I would like to eat.
Well, let's just be specific. There is nothing in here that anyone could eat, even if fresh. There's no food in this trash bag. Isn't that correct?
There is a photograph of the, it's right here on the screen, the salami container there. There is a photograph that shows something inside of there, and I cannot tell from the photograph if it is a remnant scrap of food or something else. So outside of that, I don't see pieces of food.
So the only thing that may come close to being food is something that you may see in this salami package here. That you're talking about, right?
That is the salami package I'm talking about, yes.
11. And I'd like to pull it out. Let's take a look at it.
Okay, we're going to take a recess. Jury's been going since 1:30. We'll be in recess to 3:30. State recognized presence of jury.
Yes, sir.
Defense.
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, members of the jury, was there a package back in the jury room? What did you have? From the dessert lady? Okay. Just curious. Okay. All right, Mr. Ashton, you may continue.
Thank you. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to show you item 11 from State's Exhibit 136. And I'll just speak into your microphone up here. I took the lavalier off. This is the salami can, salami container. You can see the little item inside there?
Yes, I can.
Appears to be a piece of paper, doesn't it?
It does appear to be a piece of paper.
May I publish?
You may publish.
So Dr. Huntington, now that we've examined that, you would agree that there's no food in that trash bag?
There does not appear to be any food in the trash.
Now, you mentioned in direct examination about cleaning up a decomp scene or decomp artifacts, correct?
Yes.
Now, you could take a paper towel and clean up decomp fluid in a small amount that might be on a surface, correct? Could soak it up with paper towels, correct?
I don't think it would be effective, but you could certainly try.
Sure. And you could even vacuum out any bugs that were left behind in the car with a vacuum cleaner at any gas station, correct?
That is possible, yes.
The only thing you cannot get rid of is the smell. Isn't that correct?
I think the cannot get rid of, I think is a overexpression. And certainly given for example, given the research I conducted with the pigs in the car trunk, to get rid of all of the insect evidence, as you suggested, it would involve removing the carpet liner and vacuuming underneath it from all the nooks and crannies of the trunk itself. And again, as I said, I think the smell is possible to remove, but difficult.
That brings up, what were the accumulated degree days on your pig experiment?
I would have to reference my data, and I don't believe I have it with me.
Well, but I mean, in comparing the decomposition event you showed us with the pig to anything that might apply to this case, it's essential to know the stage of decomposition, correct?
Yes.
So, but you can't tell us what the accumulated degree days were for your pig experiment?
They would be considerably less, depending on how long you are proposing.
What was the temperature, average daily temperature for the 10 days that the pig was in the trunk?
Approximately 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, is that because you wrote it down and you already did the calculation, or is that just your estimate?
That is based on calculations, but I'm going from memory here because, again, I don't have those data in front of me.
So 10 days at 60 degrees would compare to how many days at 90 degrees?
Well, it would be 600 accumulated degree days, assuming a base of 0.
Sure.
For 10 days at 60. And then it's 600 divided by 90 would give you the approximate number of days.
Which would be about 6 and change?
That sounds about right.
Not 2.
Not 2.
So you would agree that the state of decomposition of your experiment does not, in fact, coincide with 2 days of decomposition of a 2.5-year-old child wrapped in a blanket and in 2 laundry bags, or 2 garbage bags and a laundry bag. You would agree that your experiment does not match that scenario, wouldn't you agree?
If you include the increase in temperature due to solar radiation in the vehicle, that would or could substantially increase the number of accumulated degree days per calendar day or per hour. And again, it would depend on if you're giving me a scenario of 2 days, then no, it would be more in the experimental case.
And if the trunk was hotter than an average of 90 degrees, decomposition would go even faster, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So it could have actually been in the trunk for only 1 day, if in fact the temperature was considerably higher.
No, I don't think you could get that substantial amount of decomposition that would, if you're proposing that the amount of decomposition excludes the early colonizers, I don't think you could get that in one day.
No, I'm just suggesting that if the temperature is higher, the amount of time to get the same level of decomposition is less. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Dr. Huntington, you don't disagree with Dr. Haskell's findings as it relates to Suburban Drive, do you?
No, his report on the site of recovery is it's very much agreeable.
Okay, and so what transpired with your deposition and all of that, that's because you both agree that the body decomposed somewhere else other than the location where the body was found.
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Can you explain why the two of you don't disagree?
Well, I think the evidence in this case recovered from the site of recovery really does speak for itself. The body was there for some period of time. It's very difficult to say exactly how long it was there. Months is a good answer, which is what Dr. Haskell gave. The evidence at the scene suggests that the body was moved after death, some period, from some location. So that is very agreeable.
And also after some stage of decomposition has already passed, correct?
And that makes perfect sense looking at the evidence, yes.
Now, when you testified under cross-examination, you mentioned there were early colonizers. There were blowflies in the bag of the where Caylee's remains were found, the canvas bag, correct?
Yes, I believe they were in the canvas laundry bag, yes.
Okay. Can you look at Dr. Haskell's report and see how many were there, or how much insect of early colonizers was present?
Just a moment. Tallying them up, there were 75 puparia recovered from the bag.
75?
Yes.
Okay. And that, even by your standards, is not a whole lot, is it?
Objection leading.
Is that considered a lot, sir? I rephrased it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. That is very few when you consider that a single female fly can lay upwards of 300 eggs.
Would you then expect to find, since you have 75 in the bag, wouldn't you expect to find 75 in the trunk of the car or close to that amount?
If you assume that the body
Correct.
came from the trunk of the car during that period of colonization, I would expect to find many more than 75.
Okay. And since a fly has 6 legs,
Yes.
you would have to find 75 times 6 legs.
Well, it would be more than that because well, let me rephrase that. The 75 refers to the puparia, the casings of the flies that were recovered from the bag. The legs come from the adults, so it would be many more than one if fly parts or dead flies were in the trunk, yes.
Okay. So as far as you and Dr. Haskell are concerned, you agree that the body was moved, but you disagree as to where the body was prior.
Yes, Dr. Haskell makes the association with...
Objection. Comment on another witness's testimony.
This witness has been, during cross, Mr. Ashton asked significant questions as to this person, and they actually had him read from his report.
As to this scene, that is correct.
Now, I need to know what the answer is going to be before I can rule.
Sir.
Objection overruled. You may continue.
You two, okay.
Could you repeat the question?
You two do disagree as to where the body was prior to it being moved, correct?
Yes.
And that's because of the findings that you discussed under direct examination, correct?
Leading.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Why do you think that, sir?
Dr. Haskell's report makes an association with the car trunk, or his first report, suggesting that the body was contained in a vehicle's trunk, in this case, the vehicle in question, prior to deposition at the site. And in my own findings, based on the evidence from the car's trunk, I find no reason to think that there ever was a body in there. And in fact, not only do I not find anything that says there was the evidence doesn't make sense any way you look at it to say that there was a body in the trunk.
Okay. Now, you were given all these hypotheticals about chloroform and about it detracting the early colonizers. Do you think that chloroform might have detracted those 75 puparia that were in the bag if it were in the car?
That's why I suggested that if you're saying that the chloroform would prevent colonization, it either does or it doesn't. And if the assumption is that the chloroform with a body in the trunk would prevent fly colonization, you wouldn't see those particular flies.
So the actual evidence that you have in the bag tells you that that's not true.
Objection leading.
Sustain. Rephrase
Does the evidence in the bag help you in reaching that conclusion?
If we work under those assumptions that the prosecution has laid out, then it actually argues against it.
Okay. Now, you were asked about Dr. Voss, and you were asked about air samples. Have you ever heard of any case where air samples were used in a forensic setting?
Objection. Relevant. Expertise.
The question, he was asked the specific question by the prosecutor as to consider air samples, Judge. I would like to expand
Folks,
upon his knowledge of that.
I don't need speaking objection.
Yes, sir.
Objection sustained. Rephrase your question.
Sure. Are air samples recognized within the forensic scientific community?
Objection. Basis of knowledge, relevance, scope.
Sustained. On basis of knowledge, you have to establish a foundation for the witness to be able to predicate an opinion.
Yes, sir. You're a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, are you not, sir?
Yes, I am.
And do you keep up to date on the latest journals and material as it relates to decomposition?
Yes, I do, particularly because I teach about this topic.
Okay.
Could we approach? I need
You
to
may.
explain.
Dr. Huntington, you were asked during cross-examination about adipocere and the findings of Dr. Voss. Is that how you interpreted the report that you were referring to? Can you actually get that report out?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
When I read the report, when I read the phrase from the report earlier, it does not say the paper towels had adipocere on them. It says fatty acids, such as the ones detected, and I'm not going to list them, indicate a fat decomposition product like adipocere present on the paper towels. And to me, that is certainly not a definite answer. It's a product like a fat decomposition product like adipocere. It's not adipocere. Or to me, that doesn't mean adipocere.
If a conclusion is made, they say adipocere. They don't say it's like adipocere, do they?
Sustained.
So that's your interpretation of that report, correct?
Yes.
And these fatty acids could also be found in other items, can they not?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Including meat products and other things, meat products and other things that would contain those fatty acids.
Certainly, yes.
Now, tell us about adipocere. How long does it take to develop, and under what conditions?
Objection beyond his area of expertise as an entomologist.
Sustained unless you establish a foundation.
Sure. During the process of decomposition, that is something that you studied, do you not?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is adipocere is that part of the process of decomposition?
Yes, it is a byproduct of decomposition.
Okay. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long it takes for adipocere to develop and under what conditions?
Objection. It's beyond his area of expertise. He's an entomologist.
Overruled. I permit him to answer the question.
Could I board ire on the issue, Judge?
You may.
Sure. Interesting. Where do you get your information from about adipocere?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Where do you get your information from about adipocere?
Specific information regarding...
Well, the opinion you're about to give us, what is the basis of your knowledge to give those opinions about adipocere?
My experience watching both animal decomposition as well as cases I've been involved in with human remains and the associated adipocere.
Have you ever tested a substance to determine whether it's adipocere or not?
I want to object to that. That's not within the scope of the question I'm asking the witness.
The presence or absence of the adipocere in the human cases is in pathology reports. Pathology reports routinely say this body had this amount of adipocere, as well as anthropological reports. And in my research, working with animal remains is based on that experience as well as that taphonomic area of study. It is a well-established.
But that wasn't what I asked you. Remember what I asked you? Have you ever tested a substance to determine if it's adipocere?
And my answer was, you don't need to test it if somebody tells you it is adipocere. So no, I have not personally.
Okay. So your knowledge of adipocere is what people tell you. That they tell you it is, so you accept that it is, correct? That's what you're telling us?
In the sense that is how you learn everything in life, yes.
Right. So I'm just trying to determine whether you've done any actual study or whether you've just read what other people have written about it. And if that's all it is, that's fine.
No, my actual study of the production of adipocere in decomposition studies, as well as the presence or absence of it on human remains cases, I did not personally test the substance known to be adipocere to say that it is adipocere.
And other than adipocere,
I'm going to object and ask that the witness be allowed to complete his answer.
I'm sorry, I thought he was done. Go ahead.
I've lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with that.
Would you like the court to read it back to you? I didn't think I was, I'm sorry. Would you like her to read it back to you to get you back on track?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
Okay. May the attorneys approach the bench, all attorneys, along with the court.
Dr. Huntington, you were asked during cross-examination about adipocere and the findings of Dr. Voss. Is that how you interpreted the report that you were referring to? Can you actually get that report out?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
When I read the report, when I read the phrase from the report earlier, it does not say the paper towels had adipocere on them. it says fatty acids, such as the ones detected, and I'm not going to list them, indicate a fat decomposition product like adipocere present on the paper towels. And to me, that is certainly not a definite answer. It's a product like a fat decomposition product like adipocere. It's not adipocere. Or to me, that doesn't mean adipocere.
If a conclusion is made, they say adipocere. They don't say it's like adipocere, do they?
Sustain.
So that's your interpretation of that report, correct?
Yes.
And these fatty acids could also be found in other items, can they not?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And including meat products and other things, meat products and other things that would contain those fatty acids.
Certainly, yes.
Now, tell us about adipocere. How long does it take to develop, and under what conditions?
Objection beyond his area of expertise as an entomologist.
Sustain unless you establish a foundation.
Sure. During the process of decomposition, that is something that you studied, do you not?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is adipocere is that part of the process of decomposition?
Yes, it is a byproduct of decomposition.
Okay. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long it takes for adipocere to develop and under what conditions?
Objection. It's beyond his area of expertise. He's an entomologist.
Overrule, I permit him to answer the question.
Could I board ire on the issue, Judge?
You may.
Sure. You can just stay there. Where do you get your information from about adipocere?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Where do you get your information from about adipocere?
Specific information regarding...
Well, the opinion you're about to give us, what is the basis of your knowledge to give those opinions about adipocere?
My experience watching both animal decomposition as well as cases I've been involved in with human remains and the associated adipocere.
Have you ever tested a substance to determine whether it's adipocere or not?
I'm going to object to that. That's not within the scope of the question I'm asking the witness.
The presence or absence of the adipocere in the human cases is in pathology reports. Pathology reports routinely say this body had this amount of adipocere, as well as anthropological reports. And in my research, working with animal remains is based on that experience as well as that taphonomic area of study. It is a well-established...
But that wasn't what I asked you. Remember what I asked you? Have you ever tested a substance to determine if it's adipocere?
And my answer was, you don't need to test it if somebody tells you it is adipocere. So no, I have not personally.
Okay. So your knowledge of adipocere is what people tell you. That they tell you it is, so you accept that it is, correct? That's what you're telling us?
In the sense that is how you learn everything in life, yes.
Right. So I'm just trying to determine whether you've done any actual study or whether you've just read what other people have written about it. And if that's all it is, that's fine.
No, my actual study of the production of adipocere in decomposition studies, as well as the presence or absence of it on human remains cases, I did not personally test the substance known to be adipocere to say that it is adipocere.
And other than adipocere...
I'm going to object and ask that the witness be allowed to complete his answer.
I'm sorry, I thought he was done. Go ahead.
I've lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with that.
Would you like the court to read it back to you? I didn't think I was... I'm sorry. Would you like her to read it back to you to get you back on train?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
Okay. May the attorneys approach the bench, all attorneys, along with the court reporter. The state may continue with their voir dire.
Thank you. The question was whether you have personal experience in testing and determining a substance as adipocere or simply having read about it. That was the question.
Okay. No, it is not just reading about it. I have, again, extensive experience working with forensic pathologists, with forensic anthropologists who point out this is adipocere, this is not, if that answers your question.
So you would agree that it is within the realm of the forensic anthropologist to determine whether something is adipocere or not? Would you agree?
I think it is in many experts' realm, because if we go with that answer, then Dr. Vass is not an anthropologist, by my understanding.
I would move to strike that answer as being unresponsive, ask the jury to disregard it.
Jury is hereby instructed to disregard.
No further questions.
Okay.
I would maintain my objection.
Okay. Objection will be overruled.
Dr. Huntington, can you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long it takes adipocere to develop and under what conditions?
Okay. Adipocere, the conditions are going to be variable. Certainly, it is not something you expect to see on any given decomposed body. Most generally, the conditions required for adipocere formation include areas of reduced oxygen content, and more often than not, they're going to be cool and damp. So a common example would be a buried body. Bodies that are disinterred, I guess I should say, a properly buried body, like from a funeral home, that is disinterred months or years later, will very frequently have adipocere associated with it, because that is a cool, restricted oxygen content area.
And how long does it take for adipocere to develop on the body?
That also depends on, again, environmental factors, primarily temperature.
Okay. And what affects it? What would speed that up? Cooler temperatures or hotter temperatures?
That's difficult to say, because it would depend on the amount of, for example, insect activity or other carnivore scavenger activity.
And does adipocere show up in the late stages of decomposition or in the early stages?
It is primarily a late stage decomposition artifact.
Okay. And does it take weeks and months to develop or days?
That, again, it depends on environmental conditions.
Okay. But you would certainly have the opinion that it takes, it's in the latter stages of decomposition.
Objection, leading.
Sustain.
Would you say it's, in what stage would you say it shows up in?
As I said, it's the later stages of decomposition.
Okay. Now, the garbage that Mr. Ashton had asked you to see, we've gone over various photographs of that garbage, correct?
Yes.
And you saw the garbage when it was received by the sheriff's department, correct? Remember the first photograph?
The damp photographs, yes.
And you saw the photograph, you saw it afterwards. If an expert on entomology is to be consulted on a case, is it a proper practice to alter evidence before you inspect it?
Objection exceeds the scope of cross.
I don't.
Sustain.
The garbage you looked at today, this is something that was collected 3 years ago, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it is also garbage that was put in a dry room, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
And that evidence was altered than when it was originally collected, was it not?
Objection calls for an opinion outside his area of expertise.
Overruled.
It is not in the same condition that it was when it was collected. That is correct.
Okay. So to come here 3 years later and show you a can of something that was in a trunk of a car for 3 weeks, was then put in a dry room, and was then sit in a box in an evidence locker for 3 years, would you expect in your professional opinion, to be able to render a valid opinion on a box of garbage 3 years later after all of that has been done to it?
Objection. Compound question and vague as to what type of opinion? Opinion on entomology? Opinion on?
On entomology.
Sustain.
On entomology.
Answer the question now.
Okay. I would expect the physical evidence now to be different than when it was collected. Yes.
Okay. And if I may have. Showing the witness, Your Honor. Defense Exhibit C. Neither you nor Dr. Haskell got to inspect the garbage as it
Objection
was.
exceeds the scope of cross.
Overruled.
Neither you nor Dr. Haskell got to see this garbage in this state, did you, sir?
That is correct.
And you, even after reviewing all of what Dr. Haskell reviewed, he did not have this opportunity either, correct?
That is my understanding, yes, based on his reports.
Now, what could you derive from this garbage that could have ended the entire debate as to whether a dead body was in the trunk of the car?
Objection exceeds the scope of cross.
The garbage
Overruled.
was, I'm sorry, Judge, for speaking.
I said overruled.
Okay.
You can answer the question.
From the get-go, if I were the entomologist involved from law enforcement, the first thing I would have done was to request a DNA profile of the maggot gut contents that were recovered from this.
Exceeds the scope of cross and also a violation of the report
Sustain.
requirement. Move to strike.
Judge, I would,
Disregard.
Judge, I would have,
Sustained.
yes, sir. Are there other types of things that could have been done to answer this question that we are all trying to answer 3 years later?
Objection. Exceeds the scope.
Sustain.
Correct.
Sorry. Now, the maggots also eat remnants of food, do they not?
Yes, they will.
Okay. And maggots also feed on bacteria that's left from remnants of food, do they not?
Yes. Mr. Ashton had asked you about a bag being a garbage bag being an obstacle for maggots and insect activity to access it. Do you recall that line of question? Yes, I do.
Okay. I'd like to show the witness State's Exhibit 75. I'm sorry, State's Evidence 75. May I publish, Your Honor?
Yes. Published to the witness or published to the witness? and the
Published
jury?
to both the witness and the jury. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I now want to show you State's Evidence 127. May I publish that as well, Judge?
You may.
Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Can everyone else see those as well? Okay. Now, I'd like to show you State's Evidence 128. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to attempt to zoom in on the knot of the garbage bag. Can you tell us if it is knotted?
Your Honor, the photograph speaks for itself. Jury can interpret it for themselves.
Overruled, he can describe what he sees.
The drawstrings of the trash bag are knotted.
Okay. Yet maggots and insects found its way into this trash bag, did it not?
Yes, they did, based on their presence in the trash bag.
So a trash bag isn't much of a deterrent for maggots and insects, are they, sir?
Especially not when you tie them with the drawstrings. That actually leaves quite a big hole in the bag.
Okay. Now, you, Mr. Ashton had asked you about the stain that you had asked you about the stain in your study, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in fact, he went into a whole line of questioning and asked you if you had done it for this case, correct?
Yes.
And your testimony was that it was not.
That's correct. The study was done for reasons other than this case.
Is that why you didn't include pigs with plastic bags and other items like a blanket and a canvas bag?
If I were doing that study specifically for this case, I would have tried or attempted to use the same vehicle as in question. I would have wrapped or otherwise handled the pig carcasses in the same manner as the body was assumed to be in this case. It would have been conducted very differently.
Okay, you would have tried to duplicate more of the scenarios as it relates to this case.
Oh, as best as I could. In fact, I don't think I would have done it in Nebraska. There's no reason. Rather, if I were attempting to replicate this case, I would have done it during the summertime in Florida.
Okay. I'd like to then show the witness and the jury, Your Honor, State's Evidence 80.
You may.
Now, Mr. Ashton asked you if, he specifically asked you in relations to your study as to how it relates to this case. Do you recall that line of questioning, sir?
Yes, I believe he did ask me that.
Based on what you've learned, not only from this study, but from your personal experience dealing with stains on carpets from decompositional fluid, can you look at this State's Evidence 80 and render an opinion as to whether you believe this stain, or if you can see a stain, came from human decomposition?
Objection. Discovery.
Approach. Objection overruled.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Actually, I'd rather have it read back if that's okay.
Based on what you've learned, not only from this study, but from your personal experience dealing with stains on carpets from decompositional fluid, can you look at this State's Evidence 80 and render an opinion as to whether you believe this stain, or if you can see a stain, came from human decomposition?
Looking at the photograph, it does not look like a decomposition fluid stain that I have seen.
Okay. And that would include the numerous homicide scenes in which you've showed up and seen decompositional fluid on carpet stains, correct?
Yes. Homicides, suicides, natural causes, yes.
And
Limited to that and that alone, sir.
yes, sir. And is this photo a good example of what human decomposition, or let me rephrase that. Is this photo a good example of what decompositional fluid would look like on a piece of carpet?
Yes, that's why I included it.
Okay. And is this photo, specifically State's Evidence 80, a good example of what decompositional fluid looks like?
No, I don't consider it to be.
Okay. Now, sir, you were asked quite a bit about smell and the smell of the car during cross-examination. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Given the smell of decomposition, assuming that a body would be in a trunk of a car for a period of a day to days to several days, if, and this is a hypothetical, if someone ran out of gas a day or two after the body was removed, would someone be able to smell that smell of human decomposition that never goes away?
Calls for speculation beyond this witness's area of expertise.
Sustained based upon the hypothetical.
Okay. Would 4 people be able to ride in a car after a body has been in there for several days and not smell the smell of a human decomposing body that had been in there for several days?
Objection. Argumentative beyond his area of expertise.
I think the witness is saying.
Sustained.
You, sir, if I can have just a moment, Judge, I may.
You may.
Sir, you have never rendered the opinion that chewing tobacco smells the same as a decomposing body, have you?
No.
Okay. And you have never rendered the opinion that that dry trash is the same as the same smell as a decomposing body, have you?
No.
And any insinuation of such, would you consider that misleading in any way?
Commentary on counsel.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Recross?
Dr. Huntington, what was the condition of the garbage when it was in the trunk?
Based on the photographs and evidence,
No, when it was in the trunk, not when it was retrieved from the dumpster, but when it was in the trunk. What was its condition?
I have no knowledge of that, sir.
So you don't know if it was in the trunk, whether it was wet or dry, do you?
I do not.
But assuming for the sake of this hypothetical that nothing was added to the bag between the time it was in the trunk and the time it was obtained by law enforcement, we do know that there was no food in the bag, correct?
Testified that he doesn't know the condition.
Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
So when something gets wet, non-food items don't all of a sudden become food, do they?
Unless you're talking about dehydrated food, I don't believe they do.
Right. So whether it's wet or dry, it's still not food, correct?
Not as I understand the definition of food.
Now, you've given us some opinions recently about adipocera and the appearance of a stain of decomposition. Are you a forensic anthropologist?
I am not.
In fact, you got your PhD in 2008. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
The same year that this happened, that's when you got your PhD, correct?
Yes, same year.
And you got your master's degree in 2005, 3 years before that, correct?
Yes.
Did you study adipocera or decomposition stains for your bachelor's degree?
I witnessed the presence of adipocera during my bachelor's degree. I did not specifically study it, no, sir.
So this experience that you bring to bear in answering the questions about adipocera and the appearance of a decomposition stain comes from your work of the last 3 years, since your PhD, or was it before that?
No, sir, it was well before that.
Okay. So since your master's in 2005?
It began before that, sir.
Well, when did it begin?
I began working for the Hancock County Coroner's Office as a assistant when I was in high school. I believe I started when I was 16, working for a mortuary service, and I've witnessed hundreds, if not thousands, of bodies in those conditions.
And your testimony, have you ever been qualified as an expert anywhere in the United States to render an opinion about the identity of a stain? Dr. Huntington.
I don't know that such a qualification exists, and no.
So this would be the first time anybody's ever asked you to look at a photograph and determine whether it is a stain of human decomposition. Is that not correct?
To this argumentative manner of questioning, sir.
Overruled.
Isn't that correct, sir?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Yes. And this is the first time ever in a court of law that you were asked to identify from a photograph whether a stain was human decomposition. Isn't that correct, sir?
When Mr. Baez asked me the question, he asked about a decomposition fluid stain. I don't believe he qualified it with human decomposition, but either way, the answer is yes, this is the first time.
Now, you did a report in this case. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
And did you understand that you were to place in that report every opinion you had related to this case?
Beyond the scope.
It's impeachment, Judge, under, I believe Johnson is the case.
Well, Johnson doesn't stand for that.
Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong name, but
No, Johnson's the name of the case, but overruled at this point.
were you aware that you were to put every opinion that you were going to present in this case in your report?
Yes.
And that report does not contain any opinion about identifying a stain by its appearance, does it?
It's for a legal conclusion.
Overruled.
It's not in here, is it?
It is not in there.
Now, you acknowledge, well, you said on redirect that photograph was not intended to be a recreation of the events in this case, correct?
That's correct. It's strictly research.
But when you presented this to the jury, you didn't tell them that this was not a representation of what would have happened in this case, did you?
No, but I also did not tell them it was a representation.
No further questions.
Only on those issues that were covered at that time and those issues alone.
Yes, sir. Sir, you are the youngest board-certified entomologist in the country, are you not?
Objection bolstering.
These are questions that, based on what...
Overruled.
I am the youngest board-certified forensic entomologist. That is correct.
Okay. And you have been, even after getting your PhD, you have been certified through the, I'm forgetting the name of the board, American Board of Entomology?
The American Board of Forensic Entomology.
Forensic Entomology, yes.
I was certified before my PhD.
Okay. And you, in addition to that, you have worked many death investigations, have you not?
Yes, I have.
Okay. How many, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury as to how much experience you have, both in the field and, well, just on the field, actual cases?
I've consulted on approximately 75 death investigations with regards to forensic entomology.
And they've never had a problem with your age or when you got your PhD, have they? Now, finally, sir, you were asked about your report and whether you had included the identification of the stain. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any idea that you were going to be asked questions about pigs in a blanket or anything of the kind?
No, I did not expect that one to come up.
Okay. So you had no anticipation that you would be asked this line of questioning by a prosecutor. So therefore, is that a reason why you may not have put that in your report? Why didn't you put it in your report then?
I didn't think it was going to be brought up with me.
Okay. And do you feel, based on your knowledge and experience and education, that you feel comfortable with the opinions that you rendered here today?
Objection, bolstering.
Well, that question sustained, but it's sustained.
Okay. Do you feel, based on the stain, the opinion you gave on the stain, even though you didn't put it in your report, do you still render that opinion to this jury?
Objection, self-serving, bolstering.
This is the question he was asked, Judge. The fact that when you work as a forensic entomologist, do you not many times deal with photographs when identifying certain items of evidence?
Yes, in fact, many cases come strictly as photographs because no samples were recovered.
Okay. And that is a very common way that forensic entomologists work, is it not?
Yes, not only for identification of the insect evidence that may be there, but also stages of decomposition of the body, things of that nature.
And the comparison that you made with decompositional fluid versus this trunk, did that vary in any way than what you normally render opinions as a forensic entomologist?
I would think that any forensic entomologist could look at that and come to the same conclusion that I did. I would expect them to.
Thank you, sir.
May I have recross?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought you told me a moment ago that you've never been asked to look at a stain and identify it before.
Was that a question?
Looking at a stain and determining whether it's decomposition or not. I thought you said you'd never been asked to do that before.
I've never been asked in a court of law, sir.
Okay. But when you just said to Mr. Baez, this is something that entomologists do all the time, which is it?
Outside of a court of law, it is something that is done all the time. Yes, sir.
Now, this opinion of yours about the identification of this stain, you discussed that opinion with Mr. Baez back in 2008, didn't you?
Yes, I believe I said I did.
So why didn't you put it in your report?
Product.
I don't.
Overruled.
So
As to
wha-
his reasons why he didn't put it in the report.
So if you discussed it with counsel, why didn't you put it in your report?
It didn't go into the report because my report specifically focused on the insects recovered from the trunk. And because those insects were not of a medical, legal, or forensic nature, there was no reason to make any further assumptions regarding a body in the trunk.
But weren't you instructed that every opinion that you were going to issue in this case was to be included in a report?
Yes, sir.
Those boards that you discussed, they don't have any certifying body for stain identification, do they?
No, I'm not aware of one.
No further questions.
May the witness be excused. Thank you, doctor. You may be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.